Being a developer isn't all it's cracked up to be. There's a lot of content on YouTube that says how great it is to be a software developer, whether it be the free food and drink or the offices that look like a playground or the massive salaries that software developers get. But I wouldn't be being very honest if I didn't tell you about these 5 things that really suck about being a software developer. I've saved the best to last, so make sure you watch until the end. The first one is how much you need to learn outside of office hours. There's so much you need to learn as a software developer, whether it be new technologies or the language itself. Now, the problem is employers don't care about how much you need to learn. They just care that you get the job done and you meet all your deadlines. And usually there's so much work in the sprint that there's no time for learning, which just leaves your evenings and weekends to do all of that learning that you need to do to be able to be a senior developer. If the company that you're working for doesn't give you any time for training, then make sure you do use your evenings and weekends to fit in a bit of learning. You don't need to be doing it every night, but you need to do a little bit every week to try and keep up. On this channel, I'm covering everything you need to know to go from a junior developer to a senior developer in bite-sized chunks. So make sure you hit that subscribe button below so you don't miss out. In most other jobs, you can kind of forget about work as soon as you get home, but you need to continue learning as a software developer, which means subscribing to the various blogs and newsletters to keep you up to date, watching your favorite YouTubers, hi there, as well as taking courses on Udemy and Pluralsight, for example. The second thing that really sucks about being a software developer is the long hours. Now, if you want a job that is just 9 to 5 and you go home, then software development isn't it. Most software developer jobs in their contract will have around 40 hours a week, but that really is a minimum. Especially if you're working for a startup or one of the top tech companies, you can easily be doing 50 to 60 hours a week, and most of that is going to be unpaid. Whether it be a meeting that overruns by an hour or a production issue that rears its head at 5 o'clock on a Friday. Software developers just tend to end up working longer hours than you tend to get at other jobs. The salary might be 100 grand a year, but in a lot of cases you're going to be signing over all of your free time with it. Even though the high salary can be really tempting, it's worth working out how much it's actually going to cost you in the long run. There's this great book called Your Money or Your Life, and in it covers how much you're actually earning based on the hours that you're working and the amount of money you spend to be happy in the job that you're in. If you find you're working 60 hours or even 80 hours a week, once you take account of that and your commute and everything else that costs you to get into work, you might find you end up earning minimum wage even though you're on a 6-figure salary. A lot of tech companies, especially the top tech companies like your Facebook, your Google or Amazon, the work-life balance is practically non-existent. But if you work for a smaller tech company, then generally it does get a bit better. Even at smaller companies, they still have deadlines, and you might find once it gets near the deadline, you might have to do a bit of crunch time, as they call it, and put in that extra hours work. Now this brings me nicely onto my third point, which is burnout. If you're constantly working long hours, you're eventually going to be exhausted, and this is going to lead to burnout. I think part of the problem that burnout is so common in software engineering is that companies tend to work using Agile. Now with Agile, you're breaking work down into sprints, which essentially is just a never-ending conveyor belt of work. Unlike when we used to do waterfall projects, you'd have one big project which you work towards to a big delivery at the end. With Agile, you're just working one sprint after the next. There's no big goal, there's no big celebration. And half the time, when there is a big release, you're already working on the next release. So there's no rest period with Agile. It's just work, work, work all the time. Now, when a lot of companies think about Agile, they think, great, I can make lots of changes. And often they'll end up making changes halfway through a sprint. So the priorities change, the requirements change, and then you find that all the work you've done that sprint is just wasted. Now, when this happens, it's really frustrating and it can be really demotivating as well to the developers. Now, burnout is one of these things that creeps up on you. You slowly get more dissatisfied with work, you start complaining more, you haven't got the motivation to do that training or the course that you wanted to do, and you find you don't want to get up anymore in the morning, and when Sunday comes, you start dreading that Monday's just around the corner. Now, it's important to try and recognise the signs of burnout, because once burnout hits, it can take months or even a year to try and get over it. Unfortunately, the only way to break out of a burnout cycle in most cases is to quit your job. You could take a couple of weeks off to try and recover, but if that doesn't help and you find when you get back to work everything that you left behind is still waiting for you, then usually the best thing to do is to find another job. Now, my last couple of points really come down to bad management or even a bad company. Now, my fourth point is that management don't really understand programming. If the people running the company aren't software developers, they don't know what goes into software development and how much work it is to write a stable application. Now, when management doesn't really understand programming, they tend to treat programmers as workers on an assembly line. They think that programming is easy and it's not something that takes very long to do. Now, just like an assembly line, if things aren't going quick enough, they think they can just throw more developers at the problem. However, programming isn't like an assembly line. It's more like painting a picture. Now, imagine you've got a large painting that you can have multiple painters working on. Each painter is going to be at a different skill level, and you might have a lead painter that helps coordinate the other painters on what they need to paint. But each time a new painter joins, you then need to train up that painter, teach them what you're painting, how they need to paint it. And that takes time out of everyone on the team. And of course, if the painting isn't that big, then there might be a limit to the number of painters that can actually paint on the same canvas. To make matters worse, there's going to be certain bits of the painting that need to be painted first, such as the background, which is going to stop other painters from joining in. And because of this, you might find you can only have 2 painters working on the painting at any one time. Now you can see software development is like painting a picture with multiple painters. It has to be coordinated, you can't have too many of them, and everyone needs to know what they're doing. If anyone new joins, then you have to train them up, which takes time out of the other developers on the team. Taking our painter analogy a little bit further, if you say you're commissioning a piece of art from an artist, the painter might tell you it's going to take 2 weeks to paint. But you're not going to say, that's not good enough, I want it done in a week, here's another painter to make it go quicker. It just doesn't work that way, and software development is exactly the same. And management don't seem to get that. They just think they can throw money at the problem. They completely disregard the domain knowledge that all the developers need to have and the expertise that goes into building something as a team. Now, as promised, I've saved the worst to last, and it's something I don't see a lot of YouTubers talking about, and that is on-call. Like doctors, developers are expected to work on call, at least at some point in their career. Now, this is especially common if you're working for a product company whose product is live 24/7 and have customers using it. Now, why do I say that being on call is the worst thing about being a software developer? Now, when you're on call, you need to be available and ready to log onto your laptop within about 15 minutes of getting a call. Now, this can vary between companies, but generally you need to be very quick once you get a call because there's a major production issue. Now, given you're going to be on call outside office hours, it's generally going to be between 6 o'clock in the evening and 8 o'clock in the morning. So if you get a call and it's a production issue, chances are you're going to be asleep and you're going to have to wake up, sleepily open up your laptop and work out what the issue is. Now, if the issue is particularly severe, you might have to stay online until it's resolved. If it's a minor issue, you might get away with raising a bug and going back to bed. At most companies, if you've been woken up in the middle of the night to solve a production issue, you're still expected to work the next day as well. How bad an experience on call is for you will probably depend on the size of your team and the maturity of the company that you're working for. As you can imagine, small teams are going to need to be on call a lot more than larger teams. Now, larger companies do tend to have on-call centers as well. So they will triage any incidents that come up and they'll try and resolve them themselves if they can. Now, generally to do this, you give them a playbook of all the various scenarios that can happen and how to solve them. And if they can't do that, or if it doesn't work, then they'll call the person that's on call. If you're applying for a new job, it's worth asking in your interview what the provisions are for on-call. Now, some companies will have an OC team that deals with all of the production issues that come up, but other companies will expect the developers to do that as well. It's worth asking as well whether you're going to be paid for on-call work, whether you get called out or not. Some companies pay time and a half for the time that you're on call. And if you don't get called out, then that could be a great way to earn an extra bit of money. What I really don't like about on-call is the fact that whenever you're on call, you have to put your life completely on hold. You can't go out for a meal, you can't go out to the cinema. You basically need to be about 10 meters from your laptop at all times. Having a bad on-call experience can really affect your sleep, it can affect your mental health, and it can affect your relationships as well. Often find developers that have had a bad experience of on-call almost get PTSD symptoms whenever their phone goes off, because they're just conditioned to listen out for that ping and expect it to be something bad. These are my top 5 things that I think are the worst things about being a software developer, but if you've got another one, please let me know in the comments. Now, I do find that when it comes to on-call, back-end developers get called on a lot more than front-end developers do. If you're undecided whether you want to be a front-end developer or a back-end developer, then you might like to watch this video next. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.